Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.
Joining us in episode 89 is James Menzies. He's editor of Today's Trucking, where we talk about the efficiency of Canada's long combination vehicles, how getting his commercial driver's license made him a better trucking journalist, and reporting in the digital age. He shares his thoughts on the difference between the Canadian and U.S. trucking industries and the transformational changes that are happening in trucking. Also pay attention to an interesting interview he and I conducted in January. Today we have joining us James Menzies. He's an editor of Today's Trucking, and we'll get into what that is and what James does. But I'm real excited to have you on today, James. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mike. It's really a pleasure to be joining you. Usually I'm the one asking the questions, so the tables have turned, but I'm looking forward to it.
Do you remember how we became friends, James?
Are you referring to that time in the Turkish prison that we were together? Or?
Yeah. There you go.
Just kidding. I don't remember what year it was, Mike, but the first time that you were at an event introducing NACFE to the trade press, I was intrigued. I was like, why is Richard Branson? Why is his name coming up? Why is he concerned about trucking? And who is NACFE and who is Mike Roth? And from there, I was really intrigued because you were talking about this concept of freight efficiency. And, that's not a concept that at the time we talked about a lot. We talked about MPG, miles per gallon. And basically that's how we measured efficiency. But you really expanded our thinking to think about freight efficiency. In Canada, we have a lot of long combination vehicles where you have one tractor pulling two 53-foot trailers. The MPG sucks, but that's efficient. That's a really efficient way to move freight. And so I think you really broaden how we think about efficiency. And since then, I've seen you at pretty much every show. I don't know if there's any that you don't go to. I'm sure that you are even at many that I'm not at. And so we've been able to maintain that friendship, and it's been fun to go on this journey together with all the work that NACFE has done about efficiency. It's been fun to report on that and to learn, quite frankly, about a lot of technologies that we as editors don't necessarily have the means or the resources or the time to really do deep dives on. I mean, we're kind of beholden to what the manufacturers tell us, and it's great to have an independent body out there that can really do a deep dive on it and see whether it really makes sense for fleets to implement and provide that knowledge without any biases.
Yeah, you hit on really how what we're all about at NACFE, and interestingly, you brought up Richard Branson. I mean, he helped fund us through a thing called Carbon War Room from like 2012 to 2015 or 16, really when we were in formative years. And I was able to spend some time with him, and I probably shared some stories with you back then. But what struck me with him is he leans into tough stuff. I'm not sure back then I viewed our future in trucking to be as different and as hard-ish, let's call it, as what I think we're going to go through with automation, electricity, hydrogen, and so forth. You brought up the trade press, or we often affectionately call you guys the trucking media. And you were all very close, competitors, I guess, at heart, with different stories at different outlets or magazines, however you call it these days. But the group is very tight and probably pretty small. Tell us about the trucking media in North America, and maybe give us some behind the scenes as to how you do what you do.
Yeah, you know what? When I started this, it was 24 years ago, and I was embraced by the veterans of the truck writer fraternity, for lack of a better word, guys like Rolf Lockwood and Tom Berg and Steve Sturgis. And there was no competition, really. I mean, we were all doing the same thing. And that has sort of carried on. I mean, sometimes our worlds overlap with the automotive press, and they really, really consider each other competitors. We don't within trucking. I mean, we let the sales guys worry about that. And we travel a lot together. We're fortunate enough to travel all over the world together and go to all these industry functions together. And that's a lot more fun when you're friends with the guys that you're going to see on the road, and the ladies too. So we are friends. In fact, I say that my best friends are the other truck editors who do what I do, who I get to see on the road. I mean, that's kind of my social life, is when I'm out there at these events and I get to catch up with those guys. So we're very close. And, there's a time where if someone needs a picture of you at the podium and theirs didn't turn out, we'll share that. We don't, as I said, we'll let the sales guys worry about the competitive aspect. We're just all out there trying to do a good job. And I think that I have a lot of respect for the other editors out there. And I think that this industry is really well served by the trade press. And I think that's why, a lot of us stick around. Many of us have been doing this for a lot of years and for the majority of our careers. And that's because we like the people that we work with.
How did you get into this? I mean, what got you into it, and what's kept you into it?
I had no connection to trucking. I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I like to write, so I decided to take journalism. I worked briefly at a newspaper, and then I just sort of fell into trucking. One of my first assignments, I was living in Calgary, Alberta at the time, and one of my first assignments at Truck News, which is part of the group that I still work for, was on livestock hauling. And I crawled into the back of this livestock trailer and took pictures as these hogs were being loaded in. And I got out and I stunk and I was covered in dust. And I thought, this is cool. I got some great shots and I loved being around the truck drivers. And, they're down to earth guys. And then as I started developing relationships with some of the people that really are the big players in the industry, people that have built up fleets of 1,000 trucks, they all started with one truck and they're very down to earth and they would take my call. And I couldn't think of another industry where you can if you're covering tech, you can't necessarily call Bill Gates and get him to take your call. But in trucking, these guys will take your call because they're down to earth. They're blue collar people at the root of them, at their core, even if they've gone on to build these massive businesses. And I just love the people, and that's what kept me around. And then I'd written something that a local truck driving school operator in Calgary disagreed with, and he called me up and he said, listen, James, I think that you'd be better at serving the industry if you had a CDL, or in Alberta at the time it was called a Class 1 license. And he said, I'll train you for free as a service to the industry. And that really opened my eyes to what it's like for drivers and people running companies. It added to my credibility with my readers to get my CDL. And I'm eternally grateful for that. It's part of the reason why I've stuck around, because one of my favorite things to do is to get out and drive trucks on the road when I have the opportunity to do so. And the fact that individual invested in me and got me my license to make me a better truck journalist, as I said, that just really affirmed that I was in the right spot in the right industry. In fact, if I were to lose my job tomorrow for whatever reason, rather than stay in journalism, I'd probably try to find something to do in trucking. I consider myself a truck guy first and a journalist second.
Yeah, very cool. That's great stuff. And I feel exactly the same way. It's the people, and it's also, you brought up the auto industry earlier. In trucking, we have a much smaller market size. I think 5% would be the amount of trucks built versus cars built every year. And, so we've got to make do with less revenue, less money, less stuff. So I think you're exactly right. It's the people, but it's also the fact that we have to collaborate. There's not enough money in trucking to do it ourselves. And so that teamwork almost, is really, really evident here. So yeah, let's get into Canada versus U.S. trucking. I mean, I've got some thoughts. I'm sure you do. You already mentioned double 53s, but tell us about the outlet, and let's get into Canada versus U.S.
Yeah, sure. Canada versus U.S. Well, we talk in kilograms and kilometers, but no, just kidding. We have kind of a hybrid system. Like we talk about trailer lengths in feet, and we talk quite often. We'll talk about payloads in pounds rather than kilograms. We always talk in MPG instead of liters per 100 kilometers, which is the official way to do it. So we've developed this hybrid system when it comes to metric versus imperial. But I think the biggest difference between trucking in Canada and the US is that we have a lot more different configurations, and I think that makes us more efficient. Yeah, as you referred to, we talked about the LCVs with one tractor pulling 253-foot trailers. We don't have a lot of opposition to more creative configurations. We're able to haul heavier weights on more axles. And, that's something that I think that we have an edge on. Right? And when it comes to efficiency, we have a lot more different configurations that we can use. But we also have a very different highway system, right? It's like from east to west, we have basically one highway, the Trans-Canada. And so a struggle we have in Canada is that the regulations are provincially controlled. So we have this hodgepodge of regulations when it comes to weights and configurations that you can use from coast to coast. And it would really be nice if we just had one set of rules that you could take any configuration you want from the East Coast to the West Coast. That's not where
Well,
we're at.
and then along that spine, which isn't far from the U.S. border, oftentimes the trucks come into U.S. where you've got, again,
Yeah.
other federal and state rules and regulations to think about.
Yeah, and that's not even get started about California.
Yeah.
For the carriers that go to California, they got a whole other set of rules and regulations to think about.
Now I'm gonna interrupt you, and we'll get back to this. But one thing about this, single west to east freeway is that that's one place that you can focus infrastructure for, whether it's electric or hydrogen. Rather than in the U.S. we do have a lot of highways, north, south, east, west that to deal with. So, is there already talk around infrastructure being, I don't know, more straightforward because of that single spine of east to west?
Yes and no. There's a lot of talk about freight corridors, and the most heavily traveled would be from Quebec through Ontario into the U.S. And there's talk about building up the infrastructure on that first, and focus on those heavily traveled freight corridors. The problem with the Trans-Canada from east to west is that a lot of it is across pretty desolate country, that's unpopulated and very rugged still. So it's hard to find someone that has a motivation to go put charging infrastructure outside Thunder Bay, Ontario, way up in the Northwest. So the focus primarily right now is on the freight corridors that are the most heavily traveled, and that would be right from Quebec City through Montreal, on the 401 through Ontario down into the States to Detroit, and then into the US. And I think that's where we're going to see the first real rollout of electric charging infrastructure for freight trucks, and also hydrogen. There's already talk about developing a hydrogen corridor within Quebec, and then there's an acknowledgement, at least, that has to extend through Ontario into the US.
Yeah. So before we move to a different subject, what tell us about reporting in this digital world, of where we're at. How is that different than maybe 10 years ago? And tell us a little bit about the company, and how it tackles reporting on truck technologies and innovations and so forth.
Yeah, it's changed a lot, obviously. At Newcom, which is the parent company of Today's Trucking, our motto is digital first, ready for digital only. And we still have a print product that's successful, but we have to be ready to adapt. And I didn't think I'd ever get there 10 years ago. I love the print magazine. I loved reading print magazines. I loved seeing it at the end of the month, but there's a lot of limitations in print as well, like when it comes to article length, the number of pictures you can include, when you can post it. It's once a month instead of anytime you want. And so I've really embraced being digital, and that's it's inevitable that's how people want to consume their news, and we're ready for it. And I'm really embracing it because it just gives you so many more options.
Since day one, NACFI's been about, I don't know if it's multimedia or what the new term is, but we've issued something close to 70 reports in 15 years or 14 years, and we always publish a video. We always put out infographics. We have an executive summary. We have the full report. People learn different ways, and we've got to be responding to that. And the internet and online allows us to do that. So I wanted to bring up something that happened in January between you and I. I mean, you called me and you said, hey, I want to talk to you about decarbonizing freight. And I'm quick to say yes. So I often use some good old slang and the occasional soft curse words when talking, just in my daily work. I spoke yesterday, and and I threw some in there. People chuckled a little, and it gets them to pay attention to me. I suppose I do it unconsciously, but you were pressing me on something, and I said bullshit, and I a couple weeks later, the third sentence of the article, I think it was published January 15th. You quoted me, and you quoted me saying bullshit, and I was like, oh boy, that might be a first. Tell me what you remember about that. And what caused me to get a little I don't know, animated.
Well, I hope I didn't get you in any trouble. Bullshit is fine within our editorial standards, and you were on the record, so in fairness. But it was a bit of a setup because I knew what your answer was going to be, and that's why I was calling you, because we think about decarbonization in as in terms of electric vehicles and zero emission vehicles. And I don't think we talk enough about how you can start that decarbonization journey with diesel trucks and the trucks that you have in your fleet today, just with readily available off the shelf technologies. So I knew kind of where you're going to come from, but I wanted to hear it in your own words, and so it was a little bit of a setup. And I stoked your passion, and I use that word because, and I used it early in the story because I think that it really conveyed how passionate you are about the subject. And I think it caused people to probably read on. It's like, this guy
Yeah,
feels very strongly about this.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
appreciate your candor, and that's one of the things that I love about you, Mike, is that you're always candid and you'll say what's on your mind.
Well, it came at an interesting time. I mean, I had to look back this morning as to exactly, it was mid-January. I think, as we were doing Run on Less Electric Depot from like June to November of 2023, kind of most of the NACV team was embedded in battery electric trucks. We went out and visited 10 sites, 291 electric trucks. Interviewed 122 people. The run was big. We ended up going to the White House in November, with about 60 people talking about the run. So we were like all into battery electric for a few months. I mean, we had some people working on other things, but, I had been at multiple conferences and just, there had, and then going through the holidays, I think it just sat on my shoulders kind of heavy that, why is this all about electric? Why is it all about zero emission trucks? And there's more to decarbonizing freight. We've been decarbonizing, if we didn't use that term, but we've been working on efficiency, forever, and really in earnest in 20 years as fuel prices went through the roof and kind of stayed there at $4 a gallon. So yeah, I wasn't sure in hindsight if you quote unquote set me up, but you were kind of leaning in awful heavily on electric, and I'm like, stop, James, it wasn't bullshit. As we improve, if a fleet goes from 7 to 7.2 mile per gallon across 100 or 1,000 trucks, they're decarbonizing. They're shipping the same amount of freight with less fuel, and that's a big deal. So we
Yeah.
talked earlier about efficiency. That's kind of this point. That's what got under my skin. I had a lot of people say, "Boy, you went a little crazy there with Mr. Menzies," and I think it struck the chord that you were looking for, and I think I am too.
Yeah, as I said, it just speaks to your passion on the subject.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's talk about battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell for a minute. I mean,
Mhm.
Canada has some special challenges. We talked about the infrastructure piece, but also cold weather or
Mhm.
colder weather. What are some other things that that the trucking industry is looking at north of the border? I mean, you do have package delivery and a lot of smaller trucks running around that are probably going to be electric earlier. But what's the overall sentiment? The government's leaning in pretty strongly here. How would you describe it, for zero emissions in Canada?
We have some good federal incentives, and British Columbia and Quebec have some provincial incentives. And that's where we're seeing the biggest uptake, is in those two provinces of electric vehicles. And we have a lot of private fleets are actually leaning in, such as Loblaw, Canadian, or Tim Hortons. That's an institution here in Canada. They've got their first electric truck. Martin Brower is a fleet that serves McDonald's restaurants and whatnot. So we're seeing some big corporations adopt these trucks, dip their toes in the water. And I think there's a lot of people sitting on the sidelines to see how they work for those companies. And interestingly enough, early on, we're finding that there's not a huge degradation with the cold weather. In fact, we find that we've been told that extreme hot weather is worse for the batteries than extreme cold. So everyone's kind of learning as they go. And I think that the biggest findings is that it's easy enough to buy the truck. It's the infrastructure that is causing delays and unexpected expenses. That's where fleets are really struggling a little bit with their early adoption. It's working with the utilities, getting that infrastructure in. I've heard of fleets in Canada that have taken delivery of electric trucks and then can't operate them because the chargers took so much longer to get and have them installed and synced up with the utility than they expected. And those trucks are just sitting there idle. And that's not a good situation to be in.
No, no, no. I think what we're finding with the work we're doing across U.S. and in Canada is that it was unrealistic to think we could do the utility side of this, the charging infrastructure side of this, as fast as we thought. On the other hand, it's taking far too long, and it's one of our big findings from the run last year. Is it's just that it's interesting. I was at a utility conference a couple weeks ago, and there was a whole session on trucks aren't buildings. And
Yeah.
they're used to, the utility industry is used to putting in something for a building, and it takes a skyscraper or a sports stadium. I mean, it takes 5 years, a couple years of planning, a couple years of construction, and these trucks are not that. These depots can get trucks in 6-8 months, or shorter, and so we've got to figure that out. I think that's a very, very common challenge, if you will.
The challenges are not unlike they are in the U.S. And one of the great things about NACFE is that you have North America in your name, North American Council for Freight Efficiency, and you are truly North American. Quite often, one of my friends in the press in the U.S. calls Canada America's hat, and quite often that it seems that's how we're thought of. We're kind of an afterthought. But the work that you're doing has incorporated Canadian fleets, Canadian depots on run on less, and all of your reports consider Canada, and I think that's fantastic that you guys actually do extend your reach into Canada. I know you're coming up here to spread some of the findings about run on less and some of the other work you've done. So, I mean, I really appreciate that, and our industry really appreciates that because we are very integrated with the U.S. trucking industry.
Yeah, and we're getting the support to do that too. So that project you're talking about over this summer, starting with an event at the Truck World show in Toronto. Do I have that terminology right?
Yes, you do.
Yeah, we have a full day workshop in April there on electric trucks that NACFE's leading, and so we're excited to keep doing it, and that's funded by NRK, and so we're running out of time. We always do quickly, James. You see a lot of this, and you've seen it for over a couple decades now. How I've been cautious to call this a transformation with zero emissions and automation. Let's just use those two examples. But when we look back in 10 years or more, will this feel like a real turning point for our industry, away from diesel and to much more automation and technology? Or are we kind of overthinking this right now, and this will just be another small to mid change that the industry's dealt with, like we dealt with emissions and other things? I don't want to demean those pieces, but is this really as transformational as it seems right now, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, 24 years, I've never seen change come so quickly. And it is transformational, and it's happening. I mean, we talked about autonomous trucks a few years ago, like it was futuristic pie in the sky type. Well, they're running on certain lanes in certain states, and that technology is coming, and it's real. It's not just a theory now; it's real. And same with electric trucks and soon hydrogen trucks. I mean that it's coming, and it's coming fast, and it's an exciting time to be reporting on the industry because the first 15, 20 years or so, we took baby steps when it came to technology, and now things are just evolving so rapidly. It's incredible. And it's very daunting for fleets because you have to remember the vast majority in both Canada and the US, the vast majority of fleets are very small, and they only operate a handful of trucks, and they can't go out and spend twice the price on a new electric truck as they would on a diesel. So I think that the key to succeeding in this fastly changing world would be to partner up. And one of my favorite sayings that I've heard the OEMs use is partnership is the new leadership. And you've seen highly competitive OEMs partner up on developing fuel cells and partner up on rolling out charging infrastructure. They're working together. And I think that the fleets are going to have to do that too to be successful. They're going to have to lean on each other and say, okay, you've got a hydrogen truck, or you've got a battery electric truck. How's it working for you? They're going to have to share that knowledge, maybe even share that investment in the infrastructure a little bit. they have to, no one can do it on their own. It has to be done together. And I think that the OEMs are leading the way in that regard. And I think that fleets will have to work together too, at least in the knowledge sharing. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch. And I think we're going to get there. The timelines that have been put in place are very ambitious, both in Canada and the U.S. And you know, I kind of, you probably saw the report that came out recently that said it will cost $1 trillion to electrify the entire U.S. truck fleet. Well, that's now we see how committed is government. How committed are they to meeting those targets? Are they going to come to the table with the funding that's needed to make it more viable for fleets to adopt?
I think what your point is that building on a core strength that the industry already has of collaboration, we need to do more of that. This is not like, you know, asking for teamwork when there's never been teamwork. I mean, we already have the basis for being successful in this way. We just need to, you know, rely on it, trust each other a bit, you know, remain independent with the things that are important, like intellectual property and some other stuff, and, you know, pricing and sales and those things. But, you know, decide that we can work together and maybe give up a little bit to gain a lot. So thanks for being on, James. I learned a lot, and I think our audience will appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. It was a lot of fun.
Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Rosen Friends.